fresh off her electric speech last night in front of a massive crowd at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. A speech we're willing to bet Donald Trump has very much on his mind and under his skin. Because if there's one thing we can all agree on in America, it's that to Donald Trump, it's always about size, the size of the crowd. And last night, this was the massive, sprawling, energized crowd that showed up to Vice President Kamala Harris's speech. More than 75,000 people, all of them gathered in a spot that the disgraced, twice impeached, 4 times indicted ex-president knows very, very well. It's the same spot where Donald Trump rallied an angry mob to storm the U.S. Capitol and try to steal an election he knew at that moment he had lost. It's a stain on America's history that Kamala Harris seized upon in her searing closing argument last night.
Look, we know who Donald Trump is. He is the person who stood at this very spot nearly 4 years ago and sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol to overturn the will of the people in a free and fair election. An election that he knew he lost. Donald Trump intends to use the United States military against American citizens who simply disagree with him. People he calls, quote, the enemy from within. And the fact that someone disagrees with us does not make them the enemy within. That's right. They are family, neighbors, classmates, co-workers. They are fellow Americans. And as Americans, we rise and fall together. I will work with everyone, Democrats, Republicans, and independents. Unlike Donald Trump, I don't believe people who disagree with me are the enemy. He wants to put them in jail. I'll give them a seat at the table. Nearly 250 years ago, America was born when we wrested freedom from a petty tyrant. Those who came before us, the patriots at Normandy and Selma, Seneca Falls and Stonewall, on farmlands and factory floors, they did not struggle, sacrifice, and lay down their lives only to see us cede our fundamental freedoms. They didn't do that only to see us submit to the will of another petty tyrant.
Another petty tyrant. Meanwhile, Donald Trump was making his closing argument, returning to the safe spaces of Fox News, where Sean Hannity teed up every opportunity over and over again for Donald Trump to repair his campaign, to do damage control after he platformed racist comments by a comedian at his rally Sunday night.
I have no idea who he is. Somebody said there was a comedian that joked about Puerto Rico or something, and I have no idea who he is. Never saw him, never heard of him, and don't want to hear of him. But I have no idea. They put a comedian in, which everybody does. You throw comedians in. You don't vet them and go crazy. It's nobody's fault. But somebody said some bad things. Now, what they've done is taken somebody that has nothing to do with the party, has nothing to do with us, said something, and they try and make a big deal. But I don't know who it is. I don't even know who put him in. And I can't imagine it's a big deal. I've done more for Puerto Rico than any president, I think, that's ever been president.
I've done more for Puerto Rico than anyone who's ever been president, including throwing paper towels for each and every one of the people at my event. I'm not sure what that is at this point, a break from reality, garden variety gaslighting for his base. But that kind of nonsense makes it difficult for even his most ardent and determined enablers to just bail him out of the news cycle. Just ask Nikki Haley.
Why have a comedian that separates people? This isn't about people being sensitive. I mean, Puerto Ricans, that's personal for them. They take that personally. So they were right to denounce the comedian. They need to go and tell Puerto Ricans how much, they do value them. They need to tell Latinos that, but they also need to look at how they're talking about women. I mean, this bromance and this masculinity stuff, I mean, it borders on edgy to the point that it's going to make women uncomfortable. You've got affiliated PACs that are doing commercials about calling Kamala the C word, or you had speakers at Madison Square Gardens, referring to her and her pimps. That is not the way to win women.
It is not. And usually those comments come out Wednesday after your side loses. That's not the way to win women or Puerto Ricans or Latinos or anyone craving decency in our leaders. It's where we start today with some of our favorite experts and friends. Executive Director of Republican Voters Against Trump, publisher of The Bulwark, Sarah Longwell is back with us. Also joining us, political strategist, MSNBC senior political analyst Matt Dowd is here. Sarah Longwell, what for you is going to resonate of this closing message with voters over the next 7 days?
Yeah, well, it's really a question right now of contrasts in closing messages, right? Right at this point, what you need is those undecided voters, those late-breaking independents that are decisive at the end of these close races to break for Kamala Harris. And I think that the contrast in their closing messages could not be clearer. And one of the things that I loved about that speech last night is she's always been good at explaining why Donald Trump is dangerous. But she's not always as strong as sort of saying, and here's why I'm the right person to be the alternative. Sometimes she's strong on that. She was really strong at the DNC speech on that. But, it's not always in there with the kind of strength she delivered it with last night. And so we saw in these two closing performances exactly who these people are. And so American voters, they can't go into this election saying that they didn't know exactly what they were getting. Donald Trump has told them. And look, it's funny watching them distance themselves from this comedian as though that comedian weren't a direct reflection on all the other things we heard on that stage, on all the ways that Donald Trump talks about America and its people. I mean, that comedian, there's no daylight between him and the way that Donald Trump, his campaign, and his surrogates talk all the time. The only reason that they're freaked out about it right now is because they realize they've gone after a particular constituency of which there are 450,000 in Pennsylvania, which is a must-win state, and a whole bunch of Latino and Puerto Rican influencers, people that, frankly, I didn't know who Bad Bunny was until Tim Miller made me learn about him. But he has an enormous following, right? They have huge followings, and they are out there telling their audiences not to vote for Donald Trump, endorsing Kamala Harris. And she gave a contrast message that says, here's who I'm going to be. I'm going to be a president for everyone. I'm going to listen to everyone. Doesn't matter if you vote for me or not. I'm going to put behind us this chaos and this division. And so that contrast couldn't be clearer. I have been thrilled at this last week of their closing messages. And I think she's going right at the heart of swing voters and undecided voters and turning out her base. She was able to do it all in that speech. And so the contrast couldn't be clearer.
I think the idea that I know any more than you do about Bad Bunny and the celebrities can be answered by the fact that I got fired from The View because I was so illiterate. But what I do know in this fractured media environment is they're not viewed as just celebrities. They're massively important. They're deeply trusted. People see themselves in a lot of these figures. And I want to show you someone who saw something in Donald Trump and has revoked his endorsement. First, this is Donald Trump introducing who he thought Nicky Jam was.
Latin music superstar Nicky Jam. Do you know Nicky? She's hot. Where's Nicky? Where's Nicky? Thank you, Nicky. Great to be having you here. Now you have to get, oh, look. Come here. Come here. I'm glad he came up.
I mean, Matthew Duthers, Other than playing that every day to show people who he is, I'm not sure I have much to say. But importantly, Nicky Jam, who is very important, again, in his sphere of influence, has retracted his endorsement of Donald Trump in Variety. Let me read this to you. Quote, Nicky Jam states that he never in his life thought that a month after he endorsed Trump, a comedian would appear to criticize and talk badly about my Puerto Rico. That's why I'm renouncing my support for Donald Trump. Puerto Rico deserves respect. It gets at how bad is it? It's so bad. The people who thought Trump was a good idea are now making clear, not just privately but publicly, that